I haven't got it coming up on YouTube yet. It says YouTube on the screen, but I haven't got it on the website.
Right. There is a, is that us? Yeah, there's a picture of us. We're not moving, so what does that mean? No. Okay.
No, Chair, I can confirm it. We are now on YouTube.
Right, thank you very much. Good evening, members, officers, and all public watching on YouTube. Would all members and officers mute themselves and indicate by using the raised hand sign on the computer when they wish to talk. Right, I will go on to apologies for absence.
Chair, I have apologies from Councillor Peter McEwen.
Thank you, Laura. Is there any other apologies for absence anybody knows of? No. Thank you. Declaration of interest. Does any member have a declaration of interest they wish to declare? I'll take it no with silence. We move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there any comments on these minutes of the accuracy? Right, if there's no comments on the accuracy, could I have a mover and a seconder for these minutes, please?
Move, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder, please.
Second.
Thank you, Ray. All those in favour, please show just by raising your hand. All those against? Any abstentions? Reports for consideration. Item 1, the audit results report from Ernst Young. This will be given at a separate meeting.
Chair, just sorry to interrupt. We do have Neil Harris from EY with us now.
Oh, do we?
Yeah, he's joined in.
So is it? He jumped in front of me. Could I? Who is it, please?
It's Neil Harris, Chair.
Can I invite Neil Harris to give his report, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Sorry, I was a few minutes late during this meeting. Unfortunately, I didn't have the link to the Zoom meeting, so I do apologise that if you had any impression I might not be here to present the report. I'm more than happy to be here to present our audit results report that summarises the current position on our external audit of the Council's financial statements for the financial year ended 31st of March 2019, and also the responsibilities we have under the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice to issue a conclusion on the adequacy of the Council's arrangements for economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources, which is our value for money conclusion. If you've had an opportunity to read our audit results report, I don't propose to go through it page by page. I will summarise the key points on our external audit, but before I do, are just some covering statements I'd like to make. And I think it's obviously just to acknowledge that we're in September 2020 and we are delivering an audit results report for the financial year ended 31st of March 2019. And I think I want to acknowledge first and foremost the significant cooperation and assistance I've had from Adrian and Paul, who I can see on this meeting, and all members of the Council's finance team and NCOR for all of the cooperation and assistance that we've had as our first year of being the Council's external auditors. I'm sure if the officers would comment, will comment, I'm sure, on the statement of accounts, that we would all agree that this process has been very protracted in this first year. There's been a lot of frustrations and has needed a lot of perseverance and resilience on all sides to get to where we are today. But just to summarise why I think we are where we are, obviously I've been to this committee before to explain the implications of rescheduling the audit last year in light of our resourcing constraints within the firm. When we did commence the audit, I think it's fair to say on our side there have been multiple changes to our audit team, which has inbuilt some inefficiencies in our procedures. But equally, I think the council has also seen some changes in its team. There's been changes to the individuals that have been responsible for the closure of the accounts, and then those responsible for responding to audit queries during the course of the audit. There's been changes within the council's finance team and NCORE. Overlaying that, there's obviously been the implications of COVID-19 and the implications that that's had on the conclusion of the audit, both in terms of the resolution of audit matters and queries and the progress thereon, but also some of the matters we've needed to consider in light of that around events after the reporting period and going concern. I would also say that because Corby shares a finance team with East Northamptonshire Council, I think this council itself has also been impacted by the fact that we planned and performed our audit of East Northamptonshire Council first and then moved on to Corby, and we experienced similar difficulties in some parts of the external audit on East Northamptonshire Council that's then replicated itself onto Corby. So I do fully recognise that there's been almost a perfect storm on this audit at Corby, and one of which I'm sure, thinking of the officers and the external audit and yourselves as a committee, you wish not to repeat as we move into 1920 and 2021 in your preparation for unitary. So I start off with an apology on my side for the fact we're here this evening, and we could and perhaps should have been here much earlier to deliver our audit results report for the 18-19 financial year. If you have looked at the report, you will though see that on pages 34 to 35, we do set out a number of areas where we do believe there need to be improvements in the council's systems of financial control and financial reporting, both in terms of the quality control of the accounts, the working papers that have been provided for audit, and some areas where there could be improvements to control procedures. And I think it's important to say that whilst we have had our own issues, I think, in delivering this audit, and I fully would accept that responsibility for those. There are areas where I think the council could secure improvements as we move into 1920, and something that I think we would want to reflect on jointly with the council when we have a wash up of this year's audit and plan ahead. And I wanted to say that by way of introduction, Chair, because I think it's an important context, because it's been a considerable period of time since I've been before this committee. I know Adrian, as the CFO, has been briefing you and senior management within the council, and has done all the right things throughout and been very proactive and supportive with me as we've delivered this audit. But I think it's important that you hear from me now at this stage. Then if I just delve into the audit results report, some things to draw to your attention since we issued the audit plan. So our audit materiality is 1.2 million. That's pretty much the same as we set out at our planning stage, 2% of the council's gross expenditure. We plan and perform our audit work on what's called tolerable error, which is set at 600,000. That's 50% and typical of materiality and typical of what we do for first year audits. In our audit plan some time ago, we included audit risks associated with local government reorganisation, and included some more significant risks associated with provisions, the movement in reserve statement and the collection fund statement, and the accounting for the collection fund surplus. The audit results report explains why those risks have been downgraded during the course of the audit, partly because of the timetable now for local government review, and why we think this didn't create an increased incentive or risk associated with any accounting decisions and judgments for the 18-19 financial year. But also because of the work we'd undertaken quite early on when we were appointed to review the proposals put forward by the authorities in Northamptonshire on accounting for the collection fund surpluses, which in the end were not pursued. So as a result, those risks were downgraded. But there are some areas where our risks were increased, and that was particularly associated with the work we've done to review the valuation of your investment properties, particularly involving our EY real estate team and specialists to review the assumptions, particularly as your first year auditors, to review those significant investment properties in your financials, disclosed in your financial statements, the shared asset with Kettering Borough Council, the Corby Hub and Innovation Hub, and the Corby Cube in particular, were areas that our EY real estate team have looked in some detail with your valuers and with management at the assumptions underpinning those valuations. Equally, since I came to this committee, there's been pensions adjustments associated with the recognition of past service costs associated with what's called the McLeod judgment, and also the guaranteed minimum pensions equalisation, all of which the council has sought actuarial advice and updated its assumptions associated with the net pension liability and disclosed those appropriately in the updated financial statements. The other area that's changed since I presented the audit plan is the work we've had to do in response to COVID-19. So the council have prepared a documented assessment of events after the reporting period, so determined whether there are any adjusting or non-adjusting events as a result of COVID-19. And typical with most local authorities where we didn't issue our 18-19 opinion by the end of March, the council have not determined there are any adjusting events as a result of COVID-19, certainly in terms of any areas where there could be, such as the recoverability of debtors. I'm satisfied that there are no adjusting events and there's been an appropriate disclosure. The council have also prepared a draft disclosure note on going concern, and that looks at the council's liquidity position 12 months from the period at which the accounts have been authorised for issue. So you have the latest version of the accounts before you this evening. Going concern looks at the period at 12 months following those accounts that are before you this evening, and that looks at the council's liquidity position, so available cash and liquid resources, but also the council's viability position, so the level of general and available to use reserves, and the assessment of the cost and income pressures being exposed to the council as a result of COVID-19 and the scenario planning. Having reviewed the council's disclosure note on going concern, I'm satisfied that there are no matters that give me a concern and for our audit opinion, and there are no proposed modifications or qualifications in this matter. There will be an emphasis of matter in our final audit opinion that just draws attention to those disclosure notes. That's not a qualification or a modification to our audit report, and I do thank the council for officers for the time that they've spent to prepare these disclosure notes and also provide supporting evidence to summarise their assessment of the implications of COVID-19 on their budgets and their cash flow position. So and that sets us up that whilst that work would not have been necessary had we issued our audit opinion before the COVID-19 outbreak, there is some benefit from the council having undertaken this exercise now, because quite a lot of that they can now roll forward into the 1920 financial statements. So those are the changes to the audit plan. In terms of the progress of the audit, we have made now substantial progress in terms of the conclusion of the 18-19 accounts. You'll note if on section 4 of the audit results report, we've listed several adjusted differences that have been agreed by the officers and will be reflected in the final set of financial statements. At this stage, there are 2 unadjusted differences that largely reflect a control observation that we have around the way the council and the finance shared services account for cut-offs and accruals and the recognition of certain balances. Now, these are not material. The net impact on debtors is 85,000 and creditors is 286,000. But as these are above the level at which we need to report to this committee, we need to seek a view from management about why the accounts are not going to be amended for these items and obtain a clearance from this Audit and Governance Committee on those explanations in the letter of representation. At the time of the draft of this report, the appendix, I think it's Appendix B of our report, sets out several areas where we're still resolving final queries and testing on the financial statements with the officers of the council, and I'm pleased to say at the data's meeting we've made further progress. The intention from EY is that we'll be issuing our opinion this month, and I would be recommending, based on the report you have before you this evening, that you would be in a position where you could take a delegated position now, that I'd be able to provide a final position to Adrian as the CFO, and under delegated arrangement seek a view from the chair of this committee on the final position on the audit before we issue our opinion and we receive the signed financial statements and the signed letter of representation. And just to confirm where we're heading towards, we're heading towards an unqualified opinion on the council's financial statements, and that's to say they represent a true and fair view of the council's financial position up to the 31st of March 2019. I shouldn't forget about the fact that we've done a significant amount of work looking at the council's value for money arrangements. It looks at a number of areas, particularly given this is our first year as the council's auditors. We've reviewed the council's financial resilience. So we've looked at the council's budget for next year and its medium-term financial strategy. Obviously, we've overlaid that recently with the impact of COVID-19. And I'm satisfied that the council's put all the appropriate arrangements in place to secure its financial resilience. Given the investment that council has made in commercial ventures, we have looked at the council's decision making associated with its commercial arrangements, and you'll note from the audit results report we have no significant concerns associated with those arrangements. We've identified some relatively minor areas where documentation and procedures could be improved around the monitoring of the impact of those investments and future risks to the council, but we're satisfied with those arrangements. In terms of any other significant points I wanted to draw out, I think perhaps the most significant adjustments that have been made are to do with the valuation of the Corby Innovation Hub and the Corby Cube. This is resulting from our valuers reviewing the underpinning assumptions that have been made by your valuer, and our challenge of those, I think, through dialogue with the council officers and the valuers, there's been an agreement to adjust the accounts to reflect the view of our real estate specialists, and I'm satisfied that those adjustments are going to be made. But I think it's important to note that if you look at all of the adjustments that have been made to your accounts, they're probably the most significant. Important to say, though, that none of the adjustments that have been made to the accounts impact on the council's general fund balance or the council's overall financial performance. Finally, before I invite any observations from the officers and take questions from you as a committee, we do note at the end of the report about our position on audit fees. As we've not concluded the audit, it's appropriate that I have a conversation with Adrian as the CFO at the conclusion of the audit about what the final position is around any changes to the scope of our audit, where we've undertaken work that we believe has been as a result of adjustments and additional risks and procedures that we've needed to undertake, and what that means for the proposed audit fee and the process that we need to go through with public sector audit appointments to consider any variations to that fee. I think it's important, though, to take you back to what I said at the very beginning. We do recognise our own issues in terms of where we are today, and in terms of concluding the audit, I'll be giving a full position to Adrian on the costs on the audit and what we're absorbing as a firm for our resourcing constraints and the inefficiencies that we've experienced on the audit. I hope that's been a helpful overview. I want to take a little bit more time to take you through the report, conscious I've not been back before this committee for a while, and also address the point about why we are here today and not much earlier. But once again, I want to thank all the officers for the cooperation and assistance that I and my team have had throughout the audit. And at that point, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. Is there any comments from Adrian or Paul, please? Would you like to come in, Adrian?
Well, if I may, Chair. Yeah, firstly, Neil, I think we ought to apologise for not sending out the invitation for tonight until very late. So thank you for attending at such short notice. And I noticed that you already got your tie and shirt and suit on. So either you were prepared for it or you walk around the house dressed like that. And I hope it's the former and not the latter. I would agree, Neil. It has been a protracted audit. In fact, it's probably been the most protracted audit I've ever undertaken. And the reasons for that were well established and presented by Neil. I suppose the question that members members will now ask is how do we avoid this being repeated in the current year, because it's coming up in March. So that's probably a question that Neil would like to answer. The other one is on fees. I mean, I do have to express a disappointment here that here we are presenting the accounts and we still haven't yet had a conversation about fees. No doubt we will address it, but it's rather late in the day to even begin discussions on this. So those are the 2 points I'd make and invite comments back from Neil on, please, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay. So on the point about how we avoid a repeat of this next year, obviously we, as a firm, we've taken a lot of steps to address our resourcing position that kicked this off last year. But equally, I think there needs to be what I would call a workshop and a wash-up session between the EY team and the Corby and East Northamptonshire and NCORE teams to be very clear about what the learning points are, what the expectations are around quality control of accounts, working papers for audit. But equally, the commitment I need to give is that we would agree with the officers what a realistic timetable on a receipt of an auditable set of accounts and working papers that meet our expectations for 1920, but we deliver a one single team that does not change, and to make this as efficient, as effective as possible. And that would put this council's audit on a more normalised cycle than the others that we're about to start or have started for 1920. On the point of fee, I accept your point, Adrian, and obviously I would apologise for not having that conversation with you earlier. At the same time, it's difficult to present a final position or even an estimate on fee until we are nearing the conclusion of the audit, and that was always my intention to do so. I appreciate that with the passage of time during August especially, it's not been, the report has gone out without an opportunity for me to have had that conversation with you, but I think my intention was to have that conversation with you before we conclude the audit, and I issue my audit opinion, which is not inconsistent with what I do at other places or inconsistent with the expectations of PSAA. I think where there is our bigger concerns is where an auditor comes along after the opinion's been issued, sometime after the event, and asks and has a conversation about additional fees. As we're not yet at a stage of issuing our audit opinion, I think I still think I'm in a reasonable amount of time to have that conversation with you before the audit closes, but I would accept that I could have started that conversation with you earlier, and I do apologise for that.
Thank you. Julie Riley.
Unfortunately, Chair, Councillor Riley has had to leave the meeting. She just wanted to give her apologies.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Is there any questions from members? Jean.
It's not a question, Chair. It's just to say I've sat on this committee now for quite a number of years, and the audits have always been delivered on time. I appreciate what Mr. Harris is saying about the difficulties, but I hope this isn't going to be a reflection of things going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other councillors like to come in? Alexandra? Councillor Welling?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say that I didn't find this a very easy report to read. I found myself having to go back and forth. I was hoping to be able to rely upon on page 7. You mentioned that you summarise matters in the key audit issues section, and I can't find that section. So I don't know if you can point me to that section, Neil.
I think I would, sorry if I referred to page 7 erroneously. I would say, Councillor, that the executive summary section 1 as a whole, if you read that together, that would probably give you a sufficient overview on the status of the audit. Funnily enough, even though I appreciate I'm an employee of EY, I would accept the point that the report can be quite repetitive, and you do find yourself going backwards and forwards in places. I would encourage you just to stick to the executive summary, because I think that does set out where we're up to and where and the key findings from the audit.
Yeah, I think it's nice in an audit report to have very clearly not just matters arising, but action points required.
Yeah, so I think that's where it's probably a bit disjointed, because the action points, and I said this in my introduction, and to Councillor Addison's point about how can this be avoided going forward, I do appreciate there's a lot for EY to do to make sure this is not avoided, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that within the report we are identifying areas where I think the council, working with its shared service team, equally need to make some improvements as well, and we've set those out, but I appreciate that's towards the back of the report. We probably haven't drawn it out sufficiently in the executive summary.
And can I ask a question? On page 14, when you talk about your valuations, does that include the housing stock?
Yes, we would have undertaken so we've split the assessment of audit risks on valuations into two parts. So we put a significant risk on investment properties for hopefully understandable reasons, given the nature of the council's assets, and this being our first year as your auditor, and we've commented quite extensively on that. But then there's another section in our audit report that talks about the rest of the council's asset base. Now, we don't explicitly refer to the council dwellings, but yes, we have looked at the evaluation of the council dwellings. We haven't involved our real estate team to support us with that. We've been able to do sufficient testing of assumptions of ourselves, sufficient testing of the assumptions on council dwellings ourselves, and because we think we've got observable market data to compare those valuations against.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more questions on the audit from members? I have one, Neil. This is the 18-19. When can we expect the 19-20 to come forward before the committee?
So I think one commitment we need to take, one action we need to take from this meeting is an agreement, I think, with the officers about the timetable for the production of the unaudited accounts, and thereafter the timetable for the external audit, and then time your committee around that appropriately, but come back to you through you, Chair, as soon as we have that information. What I don't want to do is say right now I'll be coming to you, say by December, with an audit results report, when I think we're not yet really at a stage of getting to the final close of 18-19, and I think we do need to agree a final timetable with the officers around when we're going to receive the draft accounts, agreement of the timetable, time it's going to take the officers to produce the working papers to address some of the points in our report, and then for me to make sure that I've secured the resources to deliver it, to avoid this protracted process we've found ourselves in for 18-19. So I'm sorry if I'm ducking it a little bit here, but equally I think that conversation needs to be had jointly between EY and the council finance team.
Thank you. Thank you. Adrian?
Chair, I just wanted to wrap up, because it's not entirely clear from the report what members are being asked to do tonight. And Neil can please correct me, but my understanding of it is tonight we're asking for approval for the chair to sign the letter of representation, which is at the back of the report. And we're also asking, and you might choose different words here, but approval of the chair and me as the 1-5 officer to sign off the final version of the accounts when they're finalised. Is that correct, Neil?
It is, Adrian. That's very fair. The only thing I would say to this, in response to that, is that obviously is all working on the basis that nothing else comes out from this evening will not be material in nature. Now, from a conversation I've had with Liz Jackson, who none of you as a committee will know, but Adrian will, Liz Jackson has been providing some dedicated support to me. She's a fellow associate partner in EY. Conversations I've had with Liz returning from my annual leave has told me that we do not anticipate anything else to come out after this evening that will be material in nature. But should it be, I think Adrian and I need a conversation with yourself, Chairman, about how we make sure this committee is up to date. But otherwise, that delegation works. The only other thing I would say about the letter of representation, Adrian, is that needs to be signed as close as possible to the audit opinion. So whilst I'm happy for you to recommend that the letter of representation is signed, the actual date at which it's signed needs to coincide with when the accounts are finalised and when we issue the audit opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're asking for those 2 recommendations tonight, Chair,
Thank you.
with the caveat that Neil just mentioned.
Yeah. Alexandra?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, Neil, did Ernst & Young at all form an opinion on commingling of funds in the bank account? I'm asking this more because as we go into unitary and we're sitting looking at budgets right now, but do you have an opinion on that?
Not for 18-19, but I think as we transition, as the council transitions into the 2 new unitary bodies, there's certainly an exercise to be done around the disaggregation of assets and liabilities, which I know there are unitary work streams in place going through that right now. And there comes a point, it's probably not even for the 1920 audit, it's probably for 2021, and whoever is appointed as the auditors to the 2 unitary bodies for that exercise to be flushed out. But I do think there's a role for the external auditor to ensure there's been the appropriate disaggregation of balances, and which I think addresses your point.
Yeah, and I was just interested to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. So we move on. Our members want to receive the report, the auditor's report, and scheme a delegation to the 151 officer and the chair of the audit committee to sign the acceptance letter when the audit is completed. Is that how you wanted it worded, Adrian?
If Neil's okay with that, yes, I think it's to approve, to agree that the chair can sign the letter of representation when the accounts are complete, and also sign off the accounts when they're finalised, so long as there are no material changes.
Thank you.
Yep, that's fine.
So all members in favour, please show of accepting the 2 recommendations about signing the chair signing off along with the 151 officer. Good. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Is there any against? Any abstentions? Right, thank you for that. We'll move on to item. I must thank Neil for joining us so late. If you can now go and put your shorts on, Neil, and your summer shirt, if you like. And thank you for coming.
I'm happy to stay on. I think I think you're onto accounts, aren't you? I think I'll stay, but yeah, I'll put the short. I'll put the shorts on in half an hour. Thank you.
I thought you might have them on in the collar and tie.
Can possibly comment.
Yeah. We move on to item 2, and that is member approval for the 2018 Statement of Account and the governance statement. Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually going to defer to Paul on this one, because whilst I wrote the cover report, it was Paul that's all the hard work on the accounts. I know we've just touched on this in some detail, but I can't underestimate the amount of work that has gone into producing these set of accounts. They've almost had to be done twice, because the way that EY work is very different to the way that our previous auditors, KPMG, worked. So Paul's almost had to produce these set of accounts twice. So I'm grateful to Paul and his team. I'll just pass over to Paul now to see if you've got any further comments, because these are the actual statement of accounts that we're approving. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, thank you. Yeah, in front of you, this is the actual report my statements as there's a lot of stuff that Neil's already said and Adrian's already said that's kind of stolen my thunder, really. So I don't propose going over all of that again. But we have had a long and arduous journey to get here, I know. But the basic thing is that the accounts that you now have in front of you have got the revisions that are in Neil's audit results report, basically, at the moment. Should there be any need for anything else, and obviously annex material, then it should have to come back. But otherwise, we're hoping that these are the set of accounts that are finally going to get signed off by yourself as a committee. The important thing, I think, and Neil mentioned this as well, is that overall there's been no change to the outturn that was originally taken to the One Corby Policy Committee back in June 19. The changes that have been made have been mostly around accounting practices and presentational issues within the statements themselves. I will say going forward that we're now taking a very hard look at the way that we do our working papers. Clearly I wasn't around when we previously had KPMG here, and we've got a couple of new people looking at things, so we're revising all of that. Plus, as Neil's already said, if we can get together and decide what is actually needed between us, then hopefully there'll be a much more efficient process going forward for 1920 and then obviously into 2021. I don't think there's much more I can say on it other than the fact that I would ask for delegated approval for approval on this. I'll answer any questions.
Is there any questions from members? Looks like you got away with it, Paul. Nobody wants to come in. So if there's no questions from members, I'll move to the recommendation. Approve the statement of accounts and annual governance statement for the year ending 31st of March 2019. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Paul. Do you need anything else from us? Do you need delegated authority?
No, as long as that approval's in place, then you can sign them off eventually, can't you?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Paul.
Okay. Thank you.
Now we move on to Rachel to give our annual internal audit report and opinion. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So as you say, the report that I'm bringing to the committee this evening is the annual internal audit report and opinion for the financial year 2019-20. So this is the end of year report that we bring to you. It's a culmination of all of the work that the internal audit team has completed throughout the year. And under the public sector internal audit standards, I'm required to report to this committee on my annual opinion each year on the council's overall governance, risk and control framework. So that's the purpose of the report this evening. It was in a similar format to previous years, so members of the committee may recall seeing the report this time for 18-19. So just to take you briefly through the key sections of the report. So the main section of the report, really, the primary part is the opinion, which is provided for you on the first few pages of the full annual report in the Appendix A. So if I just take you to page 2 of Appendix A, in the shaded box, my opinion set out there for you. So overall, the opinion is of satisfactory assurance. So this is consistent with the opinion that I gave in the last couple of years. And just for context for the committee, it's consistent with the opinion I've given at other comparable local authorities that I work with over the last 12 months as well. So hopefully that gives you some assurance too. So it reflects that things aren't perfect, that we have some areas where controls could be further strengthened, but there's by no means any particular areas of concern that undermine that opinion and prevent me from giving a reasonable assurance overall. So the rest of the report really sets out the basis for that internal audit opinion. Taking you through initially, the overall summary of audit opinions is provided in Table 1. So I'm really pleased to be able to report that we didn't have any audit opinions of below satisfactory assurance during the last 12 months. So no limited assurance or no assurance reports, which is really positive, and actually an improvement on last year as well. I have provided at the bottom of table 1 a comparator with last year, where you can see that last year we had 12% of audits were less than satisfactory assurance, and this year we don't have any that fall into that category. So that's a positive move. In table 3 within the report is an overview of all of the audits and the outcomes of those. So just to note, this committee have received the vast majority of those opinions during the financial year as part of my progress reports, where I've reported back to you on the outcomes of the work we've completed. Just to draw the committee's attention to those which you hadn't seen before in any previous reports, the audits that were finalised since the last committee meeting were in relation to the payroll system, corporate fraud risks, procurement compliance, the golf course, fire risk assessments, and Section 106 monitoring. So just for completeness, at the end of this report, at Appendix 1, I have provided you with an overview of all of the audits that have been completed during the year. So the vast majority of those, as I say, have already been reported to you as part of progress reports, but that now also includes those additional 6 audits which were finalised since the last meeting as well. And within there, you've got an overview of the scope of the audit and the key findings that arose from our work. So also within my report, something else that informs my opinion is the implementation of actions which have arisen from audits. So where we've identified an area for improvement, if prompt action's been taken to address that weakness, then again that gives me some assurance that those gaps have been plugged. So I'm really pleased, it's really positive to be able to say that 94% of the actions that we recommended during 1920 have been implemented in a timely manner. And I must say that that's the highest rate of any of the councils that I work with. So, and Corby consistently perform well on that as well. So I'm really pleased to be able to report that. And again, that gives me some of the assurance that's been able to inform my overall opinion. There is a further overview of the implementation rates of audit recommendations in tables 4 and 5 of the appendix, which shows you the number of actions that have been recommended and the number that have been implemented. So at the time of reporting, there were 2 actions which remained overdue, and we will continue to monitor those and report back to this committee on the implementation of those. So those are the key sections of the assurance. The rest of the report really sets out the performance of the internal audit service ourselves. So our performance against the public sector internal audit standards and some assurance for you around our compliance with that, and also our own performance in the delivery of your audit plan during the last 12 months. So that's a quick run through of the report. This should be one of the key sources of assurance that informs your annual governance statement, which accompanies your accounts, and hopefully it's a useful source of assurance for this committee at year end. So I'm happy to take any questions on the detail. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there any questions from members to Rachel? Alexandra?
Thank you, Chair. Rachel, I just need to comment that the report is set out so beautifully and so clearly, and yeah, as I was reading through it, it was a pleasure. Not only are the results good, but it's laid out very well. So thank you for that. It makes life much easier.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Is there any other questions from members? I'll move to the recommendation. The committee is asked to receive the annual internal audit report for 1920 and note the opinion given on the basis of the audit work undertaken during the 1920 financial year. Are members willing to accept this report? Please show. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel, especially for all your hard work over the year. So we move on to the next item. I've lost all my papers now. It's young Chris. Hello, Chris.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good evening, rather. Blimey, getting a little behind myself there. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much. So this evening's report is the corporate performance report in the first instance. And the Performance Matters report that has been presented to the committee this evening covers the July 2020 edition of the Performance Matters, and I would confirm that this is the most up-to-date version of the report as received by the senior management team just in the last couple of weeks. There is a caveat to this report, is that due to the COVID emergency and consequent disruption to the council service provision, there are a small number of indicators which were unavailable or incomplete at the time of collation of the report. What I would state is that we've had a few more through, so the information that I'm going to give to you this evening differs slightly to that which is included within the report that you have in front of you, but I'll let you know where the differences lie. So insofar as the performance, 17 indicators as opposed to 15 are now on target. Those are the green indicators. One indicator is currently showing at the amber threshold. 13 indicators are currently showing at the red threshold, and only 3 indicators can now not be charted due to data not being available. The 2 indicators which have been subsequently provided are on page, both of them are on page 5 of the appendix. The LAMS LO4, which is the percentage of sites classified as acceptable under litter, and that has the outcome for that as at July 2020 is 99.42, so that's in the green threshold. And the second one is the LAMS L11, also at page 5 of 12, and that is the percentage of sites classified as grade A under fly tipping, and that has outturned at 98.55, which again is within the green threshold. So overall then, the percentage of indicators which are either within the green or amber threshold is 58%. Unfortunately, we see a reduction of 28% from last year, primarily due to the council having to divert some of its resources under the COVID emergency. In relation to month-on-month performance, the council has actually remained static, so it remains the same as of sort of June into July. That's as much as I have in terms of an overview. I am more than happy to take any questions that the committee may have in relation to Appendix 1, the Performance Matters report, and I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Chris. Is there any questions from members, please, on the performance report? Seems like everything is quiet. If there's no questions on the report.
Chair, I was just going to say, I think the council have done remarkably well given the circumstances. Officers should be congratulated on rising to this extraordinary event.
Thank you. That's well said, because they've done a very good job, you know, when you look at it under the circumstances, new challenges and everything, you know, and I think it's quite important that we do congratulate the staff, because they've been working under very hard conditions, I'd say, unknown conditions. Well, if there's no more questions from anybody, I'll move on to recommendation. Note the Performance Matters report, including Annex 1. Are all in favour, please show. All against? Any abstentions? Right. We'll now move on to Chris again with corporate feedback.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the second report I have for you this evening is the corporate feedback report. So throughout I should mention in the first instance that this report is based on feedback which has been received between October 2019 and March 2020 inclusive. And throughout the reporting period, 8 communications were classified as upheld complaints. So 45 complaints overall, of which 8 were upheld. And the summary of complaints is included in the appendix. I'll kind of point to that in a moment. Number of compliments which have been received within the same duration is 150, slightly down on the previous period, 197 in the previous period, 150 in the reporting period. Of the upheld complaints that were received, 2 were addressed to corporate services, 3 to culture and leisure, 2 to housing and neighbourhood services, and 1 to planning and environmental services. And in relation to the conclusion is the total number of complaints received by the council has decreased by 18 during the period. I should note that this kind of bucks the trend insofar as we typically see the number of complaints increase during the winter months. This has seen a decrease of 18. So just sort of note the fact that it's very, very well done. And the number of upheld complaints has also decreased by 2. Unfortunately, as I've made mention of, the number of compliments received across the authority has decreased as well by 47 in the period. The report has the appendix attached to it, which gives a bit more detail on where and how the complaints and information was received. The section which members tend to find most interesting in the appendix is the appendix to the appendix, which is on page 4 and details those upheld complaints in slightly more detail in regards to what the issues were, the departments that they were received in. But as previously, I'm more than happy to take any questions that the committee may have on the report or the appendix.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions from members, please? Alexandra?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, just to say, I think it's the clarity of your report that really leads to the fact that there aren't any questions. It's it's all in here, and yeah, having read it through instantly, I understood what you were reporting. So again, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jean?
I have to tease him, don't I, Chair? You know, it wouldn't be right if I didn't. Chris, is there any indication? I know we get it at the next report, but during this COVID period, have we had any more complaints, or has it stayed fairly steady, do you think?
In actual fact, if you're willing to bear with me for a moment, because whilst there is a kind of a 6-month report that we do that comes to this committee, the complaints is something that I monitor on a monthly basis for the purpose of bringing to as a part of the performance matters report. So I can actually give you a bit of an update on that. So in terms of, let's have a look. Let's go back to sort of April, which is the first start. So in April, the number of complaints that were received in terms of being upheld. So the percentage of complaints upheld was 0. Similarly for May, similarly for June, similarly for July. So no upheld complaints presently between April and July have been reported. So in terms of whether that's COVID related or whether that's just the council is getting exponentially better at satisfying its customers, I will leave that entirely to the committee to determine.
I think it goes to show that we've maintained our services to our residents, which is to be commended.
Thank you, Jean. Is there any other comments? Nobody's quiet. I'll move to the recommendation that members note the feedback and analysis report. Now, show of hands to accept that, to note the report, please. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. I move on to item 6. And for once, we'll get Adrian to report on item 6. It's usually down to the chair, but I'll let Adrian have his say. Is he gone?
I'm here, Chair.
Are you?
You've thrown me there. I wasn't expecting to say that, but there have been no incidents to report to this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I thought I'd give you a chance to say it for once, Adrian. Thank you for your attendance,
Thank you.
members. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.